The Michigan Wolverines had their spring football game April 1st, 2 days ago, as it is April 3rd on a Monday. And today I want to talk about Michigan football's spring game, just give some insights, opinion, and analysis, just from what I saw in my eyes, from what an article by The Athletic says, read some box score statistics, but just ultimately talk about the spring game and talk more about the potential and direction that I think this team, from a roster talent, coaching staff perspective, and all these things blended into one, where I think this team is heading, both in the short term and in the long term, but especially since we're talking about the spring game, which correlates directly with the 2023 season, we are going to mostly be talking about the short term and where I think the Wolverines will land in 2023. The spring game, the final score was 22-21. The Maize Team overtaking the Blue Team with a 2-point conversion. That was the final score of the game. There were multiple different players that got playing time, of course, as it is the spring game. Quarterbacks Jack Tuttle, JJ McCarthy, Alex Orji, and Davis Warren, nearly forgot his name. They all got playing time significantly. Donovan Edwards and Blake Corum obviously sat out, but Benjamin Hall, Kalel Mullings. You also had, for the Maize Team, Leon Franklin, Tavier Dunlap, Isaiah Gash. You had multiple different running backs take the field, multiple young offensive linemen, as many offensive linemen are recovering from injuries, like Miles Hinton, Ladarius Henderson, Drake Nugent. And look, the offensive line's just trying to get healthy here. And I named the 3 incoming offensive line transfers who are recovering, getting healthy, they're learning the system, being a part of it, but they're going to be very good players. Look, I think Michigan's going to reload at the offensive line. I guess we'll start there. Michigan's offensive line and the defensive line, too, looked phenomenal, despite the losses in those areas and the lack of health currently, and the playing of multiple players on the first team, second team, third team, and the scout team on the offensive line. It looked pretty darn good. I think Michigan, especially in the interior of the offensive line, with Zach Zinner and Trevor Keegan returning, I think Michigan will reload on the offensive line. I think they are set to improve on the interior of their offensive line, and I cannot wait to see what that looks like in the fall when Michigan faces teams that aren't themselves. The spring game is unique because if a good team, if a team you know for certain, or you're very confident that they're going to be good, and they're playing against their counterparts on the other side of the ball, and it's pretty well balanced, it can teach you something. The spring game can. For teams that, like Nebraska last year, and for teams that aren't as well known, that have a lot of changes, the spring game really just is getting a look at the players, getting a look at the whole system. But for a program that has some continuity, so like Michigan, Ohio State, these teams that have, over the course of years and years, had consistency, they have a winning tradition, both in recent memory and in the long-term history, I think you can gather more from those spring games, and Michigan has that. And I liked what I saw from the offensive line and the defensive line. It was a very back and forth battle. On the defensive side of the ball, Josaiah Stewart was very impressive. 5 tackles, 2 tackles for loss, and a sack. We got to see Nakai Hill-Green, Amorian Walker, who was recruited as a wide receiver but was playing corner. He was not good in coverage at all, got burned several times, but he had 4 sacks and a fumble recovery. Kenneth Grant had 3 tackles. Chris Jenkins had 2 tackles and 1 tackle for loss, and that was on the Blue Team. On the Maize Team, on the defensive side of the ball, Ernst Hausmann, 8 tackles, a tackle for loss, and a forced fumble. He is going to be a standout at linebacker. I'm telling you. He is going to be a great linebacker, not just for the short term and for 2023, but he played at Nebraska as a true freshman. He's going to be at Michigan in 2024, maybe for longer than that. Who knows? We'll see. But he is going to have an impact beyond this year at the University of Michigan. Derek Moore and Rayshawn Benny. Moore had 7 tackles. Benny had 6. Both had 2 tackles for loss, and Benny had 1 sack. The defensive line was phenomenal. Keyshawn Bennett and Jalen Harrell each had 1 quarterback hurry. Jaden McBurrows, who is, I think, competing with Amorian Walker for that other corner spot opposite of Will Johnson. He had 1 tackle and a tackle for loss. The secondary, the linebacker room, it was all great. Micah Pollard got 6 tackles. RJ Moten had 7 tackles. The defense just looked good. Outside of Amorian Walker, the defense was overall very solid. On the defensive line I think was the best part of this team, which to me, I was a guy who, from the beginning of the 2023 preseason, my thought was that Michigan's back 7 would be better than their front 6. And I say front 6 because Michigan typically runs a 4-2-5. However, this spring game might change my mind on that, but I want to wait and also read more on this team, watch for what they do in the transfer portal when it reopens on May 1st through 15th, because I do have an itching feeling that Michigan might want to pick up a player or 2 or 3 in that time frame. The offense, 22-21, obviously more of a defensive game. It was 7-7 at the half, but JJ McCarthy had very limited playing time. Obviously, with Blake Corum and Donovan Edwards out and the offensive line not being fully healthy, the defense was going to be better fit to perform at 100% capacity than the offense was, because Michigan, run-heavy team, they're a run-first team. They love to lean on their run game, and having their 2 best running backs out is not going to help the offense. That being said, Jack Tuttle looked competent. He looked much better than I've ever seen him at Indiana. He went 6 of 12 for 57 yards and a pick, which is not great, but he had 8 carries of 32 yards and a long of 7, did have 1 fumble. Reportedly in spring camp, he has looked very good and will probably be the second string, at worst third string quarterback behind starter JJ McCarthy. That was for the blue team, of course. You had Alex Orji on the blue team and Jack Tuttle. Orji went 4 of 6 for 47 yards and 1 touchdown. His skill set is interesting. I love him as an athlete. I would love to see quarterback run packages that involve Alex Orji for sure come fall. I'd love to see that. The Maize team had the better quarterback room with JJ McCarthy and Davis Warren. Warren went 8 of 13 for 163 yards and a pick. McCarthy went 7 of 10, 85 yards and a touchdown. He had 1 bad overthrow, which resulted in an interception. McCarthy also had 1 non-sack carry for 2 yards. Warren had 1 carry for -1 yards. That was for quarterbacks. Running the ball, though, Benjamin Hall, very impressive. Kalel Mullings, too. This is, again, for the blue team. Benjamin Hall had 13 carries for 96 yards and 1 touchdown with a long of 31. Benjamin Hall, I think, is 225, 6'2", mid-tier 3-star out of Georgia, according to 24/7 Sports. I think, from what I saw in the spring game, and we'll have to see if it translates over to fall if he gets any playing time, very underrated player and great get for running backs coach Mike Hart, who coached the Maize team and made the decision to go for that 2-point conversion. So Mike Hart, being aggressive both on the recruiting trail and in-game decision-making. You just love to see it. Kalel Mullings had 9 carries for 35 yards and a touchdown with a long of 18. And then on the Maize team, Leon Franklin and Tavier Dunlap got the bulk of carries there. They did not have as impressive of a game as the blue team did running the football. Peyton O'Leary at wide receiver, he had 7 targets, 6 receptions for 126 yards. Cornelius Johnson, Christian Dixon, Darius Clemens were examples of players that did not get much playing time at all. Cornelius Johnson, Christian Dixon, Darius Clemens only got 7 combined targets. Since they are starters, or all of them except for maybe Christian Dixon are going to get probably more playing time than Peyton O'Leary, I expect that they were being rested and saved. And on the opposite side of the Maize team, Frederick Moore and A.J. Barner were the leaders for the blue team on the receiving end of things. So those are just some statistics and just some of my analysis. I think the spring game showed that Michigan, they are title contenders. And by the spring game showed, I'm not saying that the spring game changed my opinion. Spring games do very little to change opinion, if we're being honest. Actual games, transfer portal moves, injuries, all of that does much more than a single spring game, which is, an open practice essentially, does to convince me. But I've been convinced since Michigan lost to TCU in a game that I think they would win 8 out of 10 times if they played TCU in a 10-game series. I've been convinced that through motivation and through the fact that they're top 5 in returning production, that they are going to seek a national championship, and they are going to win one in 2023. And my reaction to the spring game is this: Michigan is deep, Michigan is fast, Michigan defensively is they might have the best defense they have ever had in the Jim Harbaugh era, like talent-wise, schematic-wise. Talent-wise, maybe the 2016 or 17 teams, maybe 18 was better talent-wise, but schematic-wise, this is for sure going to be the best Michigan team there is. Jesse Minter, Sharon Moore, Ben Herbert, those are the 2 coordinators, and then Herbert is obviously the strength and conditioning coach. They're all getting paid $1 million or more, so Michigan is more invested in its football program now than it has ever been. Great assistant coaching pool, great coordinators, and Jim Harbaugh is getting better as a head coach year after year. But from a talent perspective, there is real potential for this to be the most talented Michigan team, Michigan defense, and Michigan offense that Jim Harbaugh has ever had at Michigan, which is saying a lot because the 2016, 17, and 18 teams, and even the 2021 team, especially on defense and offense, defense with Hutchinson and Ojabo, offense with Haskins, that offensive line, and a healthy tight end in Eric All. That's saying something. All those 4 teams that I listed had serious talent. 2017 especially on defense, 2016 on all sides of the ball, minus quarterback and running back, and 2018 pretty much everywhere. The difference is Michigan now has better strength and conditioning, so they better develop the talent they have on deck. They have much better schemers, much better planners, and they have a better head coach who reinvented himself after facing adversity in 2020. The offensive line and defensive line play were fantastic. I think these lines will only get better in the fall when more players, especially on the offensive line, are healthy. This offensive line was the same offensive line that helped Michigan rush for 400 yards on Penn State last year, a team that finished top 5 in defensive efficiency and who, according to Pro Football Focus, is a top 5 defensive coordinator. Now, I think the latter of that is bullcrap. I don't think Manny Diaz is a top 5 defensive coordinator. He's good, but he is not that good. But Penn State's defense last year, outside of that Michigan game, they did their job. And the 44 points they surrendered to Ohio State more so had to do with poor schematics on the offensive side of the ball and JT Tuimoloau having a phenomenal game. But I think that this Michigan O-line, with what they have returning, the development they have, and what they're bringing in through the portal, this O-line could help their team rush for 200 yards on basically anyone in the nation. This O-line, they won the Joe Moore Award 2 years in a row. Looking back on it, I don't know if they deserved it necessarily in 2021. 2022, the offensive line was certainly better, but they laid an egg and had a bad performance nationally when facing off against TCU. They could win it again for the third time in a row this year. Wouldn't surprise me at all. And this year, same with last year, they could actually deserve it, or more than deserve it, I think, if they are healthy. And with the running backs they have, once the running backs get healthy, we already have Benjamin Hall, we have C.J. Stokes, Cole Cabana, too, coming in from the 2023 class. This running back room might be the deepest in the country. That's what the spring game might have taught me. Ohio State's, I would have said before the spring game, was a deeper room. I wouldn't have said it was better because Corum and Edwards are amazing. Them two as a duo make Michigan's running back room better than any running back room in the country. But Ohio State's, you had Chip Trayanum, you had Dallin Hayden, you had, again, Travion Henderson, Mayan Williams. I think Evan Pryor is still there. He's been constantly dealing with injuries, unfortunately. You have guys at Ohio State. You have dudes. Benjamin Hall's a dude. 3-star, true freshman. He could change my opinion on that, and that Michigan could have the best running back duo and the deepest running back room and best individual running back in the country. It's phenomenal. Those are the strengths. The strengths for this team are basically everything. There are no major weaknesses that have great cause for concern. That doesn't mean I don't have concern, though. There always needs to be a healthy level of skepticism or concern. And for me, that is the wide receiver room. And I would say the defensive back room, but I think Michigan's pretty deep, pretty set, and loaded at safety. I think they might have one of the best safety rooms in the country. And Will Johnson could be one of the best corners in the country. The problem is who lines up opposite of Will Johnson. Jaden McBurrows or Amorian Walker, the play that they have, and I say this especially with Amorian Walker, is a massive drop-off from the play of Will Johnson. And maybe Jaden McBurrows is that much better, and maybe that's why they didn't play him much or as much in the spring game. But maybe that is also, maybe the reason why they didn't play him as much in the spring game was because Amorian Walker is better, or maybe he's dealing with something. So there is some mystery surrounding that opposite corner spot. I have a friend of mine who thinks that Michigan will, at least, he thinks they'll go in the portal. He knows that they should, at least to get a backup piece there, if McBurrows or Amorian somehow pan out just so they can have some extra depth at corner, which is needed. He thinks that they will go into the portal and try and find a solid cornerback to bring to Michigan and set opposite of Will Johnson. You cannot have, Amorian Walker got boxed out in the end zone, torched on multiple plays. You can't have that. Because in order for Michigan to win a national title, they're going to have to not only be great on offense and consistent, which means what happened against TCU with JJ McCarthy and Kalel Mullings can't happen again. It also means they're going to have to be locked down on the defensive side of the ball, which they weren't against TCU again. That game forever haunts me and also makes me mad because unlike the Georgia game where Michigan showed up and no matter how many times they were on that field, they weren't beating Georgia, Michigan showed up to the TCU game and played one of the worst games of the year and blew an opportunity at least being 14-1 and winning a playoff game. But anyway, the cornerback room, I'm worried about just from a point of it could become a liability, that opposite corner spot, if Jaden McBurrows or Amorian Walker don't step up, or if the staff doesn't step up in response to those two players not improving and go to the portal, or go to the portal for precautionary measures. The wide receiver room is a different story. I'm not concerned about them for having major issues, but I am concerned about them in the liability aspect again. They don't have elite talent at wide receiver. And by elite talent, I'm not saying you need a Marvin Harrison Jr., you need a Cedric Tillman, you need a Jordan Addison. You don't need those guys. But you do need an Emeka Egbuka. You do need a Mario Williams. You do need a John Mechie. You know, Jamison Williams was viewed as the better threat, better wide receiver than John Mechie. But when Mechie went down, Mechie was still critical to Alabama's 2021 success. their title run, even though he got injured in the SEC championship game. He helped them beat Georgia. You need one of those guys who isn't a unicorn, but is still an elite wide receiver. Because a unicorn's like that once-in-a-lifetime talent at wide receiver. You maybe get like one or two of those guys per position a year, and that's a maybe. Some years you don't get any of those guys at a position. You get elite players every year. You don't get unicorns every year. I'm not asking for Michigan to go get a unicorn at wide receiver. Michigan football, the way they want to play, they need unicorns at offensive line and at running back. Maybe quarterback. They need them especially on defense too, and I think there's a possibility that they have some on the defensive side of the ball. And I think they have one on offense in Donovan Edwards. At wide receiver, there aren't even any elite players. Roman Wilson, Cornelius Johnson, these are guys who would start at any school, but they would not be wide receiver 1. They might not even be wide receiver 2 at some schools. Cornelius Johnson or Roman Wilson would probably compete for the wide receiver 3 or 4 spot at Ohio State. And it would really help Michigan if they could have a wide receiver like an Emeka Egbuka, who isn't a Marvin Harrison Jr., but is an elite athlete and can make big plays, get separation, and have just an NFL-type wide receiver. Maybe like a Quentin Johnson, for example. He's not a unicorn, but elite wide receiver, that's for sure. That's my concern there, because Michigan at quarterback and wide receiver at passing game with a great wide receiver room and a great quarterback in JJ McCarthy, who maybe, though I'm not going to bet on it, could be elite. Your ceiling with a passing game is going to be great. Your ceiling at run game is unicorn level, but when Michigan faces a Georgia, or when Michigan faces an Ohio State defensive line that will be Ohio State's best defensive line since maybe 2019 with Chase Young, and maybe some issues are caused in the run game department, or maybe if Blake Corum or Donovan Edwards gets injured again and the run game's hampered or the offensive line isn't having a great day, can Michigan's pass game snipe opponents to death? And it will be very helpful to them if they can have that type of a passing game. But that's just me looking at the spring game, drawing my own conclusions, and also using some of those conclusions and statistics and other things just to talk about some points that I wanted to talk about and discuss some things that I think are relevant to Michigan football. I'm going to be covering most Big Ten spring games. Michigan's was very early again, so when Ohio State and Penn State, Michigan State, other Big Ten schools have theirs, you will just be confident that I will cover those games. Thank you all for watching. Please subscribe to this channel if you haven't already and hit the notification bell so you can get notified when I post Big Ten football content. Comment your thoughts on the spring game down below and like this video and watch it all the way through. And also share it around to any Michigan friends that you have or any college football fans in general to help the channel grow. Talk to you later, guys.